Higher off the ground.
What is the purpose of tonight, my baby? Is my fortune the main act? I need to feel where you at, my baby. Are you ready to create something new? I don't want it to be all the same. Let me take you away.
us feel alive. We keep this love in a photograph. We make these memories for ourselves, where our eyes are never closing, our hearts are never broken, time's forever frozen still. So you can keep me inside the pocket of your ripped jeans, holding me closer till our eyes meet. You won't ever be alone. And if you hurt me, well, that's okay, baby. Only words bleed inside these pages. You just hold me. I won't ever let you go.
Gonna find you and take it slowly. Ready or not, here I come. You can't hide. Gonna find you and make you want me. Ready or not, here I come. You can't hide. Gonna find you and take it slowly. Ready or not, here I come. You can't hide. Gonna find you and make you want me. Make you want me. Make you want me. Make you want me.
zamoliti sviju da sjednu, samo počinjemo s programom. Dobro jutro svima. U ime organizatora želim da vam se zahvalim što ste došli danas drugi dan konferencije i da vam poželim dobrodošlicu još jednom. Danas imamo nešto kraći program, a počinjemo sa gospodinom Thomasom Spainom. Ako ga mogu zamoliti da izađe i da nam prezentuje. Hvala.
One, two. Dobro jutro. Did I say that right? Good morning, everyone. So, as you may or may not notice from the accent, I'm from Ireland, a small country. That's not my presentation. In Ireland, we have a couple of things in common with Bosnia-Herzegovina, and one major difference. In common, we have the fact that we're very small countries on the edges of Europe, small populations. And the difference between Ireland and Bosnia-Herzegovina will be apparent in approximately a week's time when the Irish football team comes to Bosnia to eliminate Bosnia from the European Championship. I apologize in advance. May the best win. Okay, so I'm here to talk to you today about acronyms. The British Council is a huge fan of acronyms. If you want to work for the British Council, I suggest you learn as many acronyms as you can, practice them. And the acronym we're going to be talking about today, we're going to talk about two. The first one is EMI, and EMI stands for English as a Medium of Instruction, or sometimes people just say English Medium Instruction. And the idea is, of course, that lecturers around Europe and, in fact, in the rest of the world delivering their content in university through English, where usually, but not always, neither the lecturer nor the students in the class have English as a first language. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about the background to that, very quickly, about some of the problems and issues that it creates and causes, and then hopefully a look at some of the possible solutions, and that's where the second acronym will come in. So first of all, a little bit of the background. So the British Council carried out a huge global survey, lots of countries, as you can see. There's the countries, asking for information about what the situation was with regards to EMI in those countries. One of the interesting things is that EMI tends not to be driven by the institutions themselves, and certainly not by the governments. So, for example, you can see that in most countries, the governments had nothing to do with it. It was the universities themselves, or even faculties themselves, who decided to change to EMI because they saw benefits. That's not the same everywhere. For example, in China and in Japan, the government have very strict rules now about English being a part of most people's university experience. And even closer to here in Turkey, if you want to study in a Turkish university now, you have to study through English, a certain portion of your degree. And in fact, in Turkey, that's caused problems, because if your English isn't good enough to start your chemistry degree, then they send you to a preparatory year class where you have to spend the first year of university studying only English and not chemistry in order to get ready to be able to do your degree. So, and people find that quite frustrating. And I should say that I'm not here to say that EMI is a fantastic thing necessarily, but I am here to say that because EMI is actually happening and seems to be with us for a long time, we can think about ways to make it easier or better. So why do EMI in the first place? And these were the answers that were given. It's quite interesting, the difference between the left-hand side and the right-hand side. In fact, the left-hand side could be summarized by one word, which is money. But the right-hand side is quite interesting. I was having a conversation at dinner last night, and I said that the most interesting thing for me is that teachers actually said world peace. This is, remember, teachers in 55 different countries responding, and that was one of the common answers. This is quite nice. I also think this is interesting because I wonder Whether the teachers are answering thinking about themselves or thinking about their students? Or is it a combination of both? Some more recent research that was carried out. As you can see, this involved 38 higher education institutions across Europe. And some of the findings are interesting. So first of all, most lecturers and students in fact feel that EMI is all about language skills. So the lecturer thinks, well, the better my language, the better I will be at teaching through English. And in fact, many lecturers will say, I'm not ready yet. And then you'll ask them a year later when their English is better and they'll say, I'm still not ready yet, give me more time. And they feel they have to achieve some level of perfection in English, whatever that is, so that they can do the job. But it's more than about just language. This is interesting because Bosnia is actually an excellent example of a part of the world that is multicultural, if you like. And Bosnia is a country which has a skill set because of its multiculturality that actually goes really well with this. That's not true for many countries and many universities where EMI, meaning multilingual and multicultural elements in the classroom, causes problems. And, of course, teachers also need to have skills in these areas as well. So what are the main issues? Well, first of all, classrooms and classroom sizes. So big classes, small classes, working through English. But also the most interesting thing is the classroom composition. Who are the students in the class? Where do they come from? What language do they speak? What's their knowledge of the content? We spoke about language, but language is interesting because we talk about language in terms of 4 different skills. And interestingly, I think if students are doing their degree course through EMI, I think we'd agree that we would expect or hope that the students by the end of the degree course would have better skills in English than when they started at the beginning of the degree course. However, if the degree course consists mainly of listening and reading, but not very much speaking and possibly very little writing, then is that going to be the final outcome? And what does the balance need to be? And what kind of level in each skill should we need to be looking for? These are all questions which don't have answers at the moment. Student participation becomes really, really important. Much more important, perhaps, than in the traditional university model. Anybody know what that is? Just checking. It's an integrated circuit, apparently. I didn't know either. Integration is one of the major elements of the EMI classroom and possibly one of the major elements of internationalization of universities. So if universities are going to have staff, but especially students coming from lots of different countries and cultures, then the effort that needs to be made on the part of the institution and on the part of the lecturers to integrate those different students together has to be much bigger than perhaps it is at the moment. And that's something I think that tends to get forgotten in the mix. So those are the classic common European framework levels that we talk about. And the debate at the moment in EMI is what level is the appropriate level for the teacher to have, and what level is the minimum level we should ask the student to have. So let's take a vote. So you're a university lecturer, you're going to deliver your content through English starting tomorrow. What level do you think you should have? So can we have, do you think C2 is the necessary level? C2, we have some votes. C1, a little bit more than C2. B2, some votes for that as well. And lower, is lower okay? And we have no hands for lower. But as you can see, there's a division even here between those 3 different levels. And there's quite a difference between B2 and C2 in terms of level. What about the students? Do you think B1 is high enough for students to be able to study their content through English?
It depends what subject.
Give an example.
Technical studies, B1 might be okay, but for humanities, for example, B2 or C1 would be fair enough.
That's quite an interesting answer. So the suggestion is that for technical studies, maybe lower language skills are necessary, but for social sciences, maybe higher language skills. And that's one of the interesting it's a good answer. It's one of the interesting preconceptions as well about EMI, is that if you're studying maths, for example, then the language in which you study is not necessarily so important because maths has a language of its own that everybody speaks. Whereas if you're studying social science, well, you know, we have to debate and argue and there's no correct answer. So it's more important to have the language skills. And actually, one of the things we've discovered by doing these courses is that's not necessarily the case. I'll give you some interesting examples. In the Spanish university where I used to work, they decided to introduce EMI, and for the teachers, they asked for C1 level. However, they didn't ask for the teachers to produce any certificates to show that they had C1 level. They used to send them down to the British Council office and they'd say to us, tell us if that person is good enough to do their job through English. And we could do whatever we wanted. We could formally test them, we could informally test them, we could chat to them and phone and say, yeah, we think, yeah, fine. And then we asked those teachers who started teaching English, we said, so what's the requisite for your students? And they said, oh no, there's no requisite. And I said, I'm sorry? And he said, no, we just asked the students, would you like to do this degree in English? And the ones that say yes, we put them in the English class. And I said, and did you level test them or ask them if they could speak English? Oh, no, it's voluntary. And amazingly, it worked. I'm not sure how well it worked at the beginning. They wouldn't let me into the classes to see. But over time, it seemed to work. In an Italian university where I worked, it was quite interesting because one of the lecturers decided that because he had a class of first years and he really believed in EMI, he decided that he would teach his class through English. He didn't tell the university, he didn't tell his department. He came in on the first day and just started speaking to his students in English with slides in Italian. Now, because the students were first years, he got away with it because first year students don't really know what to expect, don't really know what rights or rules exist in the university. So he managed to do the whole academic year teaching through English. And when he was on a course with me and he told his colleagues in other departments, they were shocked and horrified. And they said, but what did the students, did they complain? Oh, no, they're first years. They don't complain. It's quite interesting. So there's a huge variety happening around the world in terms of levels that are being accepted and in terms of the way this is working. One of the interesting commonalities as well, and this is quite logical, is that lecturers don't see themselves as English language teachers. Here's another acronym, ESP, English for Specific Purposes. So for example, if you wanted to study as a lawyer, you'd study legal English, English for specific purposes. And lecturers all say, or most lecturers say, well, I'm not responsible for their English, I'm responsible for teaching them the content of my subject. And they kind of remove themselves from the any responsibility in terms of their students' language skills improving over the course of the degree. However, at the same time, they agree that by the end of the degree, they would expect their students' language skills to be stronger. So then we would say, so who's going to make that happen? And there's a silence. And the student, really, for themselves, is the answer at the moment. So class size and composition. One of the interesting things about EMI, of course, is that you will have a class where the students will have, first of all, very different language skills. So in the example I just gave you, you could have everything from A1 to C1 in your class. You could have people that are understanding very little and people who are understanding everything, people whose English is better than the teachers, and people whose English is significantly worse. So that's one problem. The second problem is the problem which is common to all classes everywhere in the world, is that there will, of course, be mixed ability in the content itself. So that's the second variable. And then the third and fourth variables, perhaps, is what is the L1? So what is, if you like, the native language of each of the people in the classroom? Because as universities internationalize, the students will be speaking English as their second language, but will have different languages as their first language. So in the example I gave of the Italian lecturer, it was quite easy for him to suddenly switch into Italian to explain a difficult concept because he knew that everybody was Italian and would understand. But in the future, that won't be the case. And the final variable is the cultural background. So, for example, if we take the example of Asian students, they would be unlikely to ever put their hand up in a class to answer a question posed by the lecturer, because the danger to their, let's say, self-esteem of getting the answer wrong outweighs the fact that they might know the answer. And that's something that the lecturer would have to take into account and have a major influence on the teaching style. So all these things mean that perhaps the traditional kind of lecture that still happens in many universities, and that was talked about yesterday by Ivan and Carl here on this stage, is not really going to work anymore. And there's a picture. Yesterday we saw some beautiful examples of classrooms which can be reorganized, which can have different shapes, different furnitures to encourage different styles of teaching. But unfortunately, many universities are still stuck with this infrastructure. So if the lecturing style has to change, then the way we use the spaces will have to change as well. Student participation and integration. One of the major advantages, perhaps, of EMI is that it forces the student to be a more autonomous learner. If the student is worried about how much they're going to understand in class, it's more likely that the student is going to read and watch and learn more stuff outside of class, both before and after, in order to try and keep up. So maybe this is a Trojan horse in the sense of moving towards more autonomous learning communities. And in that sense, it could be a good thing. So the British Council decided to develop a course to help lecturers who are involved in this scenario. The course is called ATE. That's our second big acronym of the day. So it's called Academic Teaching Excellence. We'll talk about what that means in a moment. It was developed with the Department of Education in Oxford University. So the course was written in 2013. That was myself and a colleague from the British Council together with the academics from the department. It was piloted in 3 locations in the same year. And since then, we've now trained 2 cohorts of trainers. They've all been trained in Oxford. And we've trained people from Kazakhstan, for example. We've trained people from the British Council in Japan. So the course can now be offered and delivered in many, many countries around the world. And in fact, in 2014, it was delivered in 11 countries. There are the countries. You can see that Croatia and Slovenia, your neighbours, have already been involved in this process. And in fact, later on, which is not included here, well, early in 2015, they delivered 6 courses in Mexico as well. And we've also had courses in Japan. So, well, Japan is there. So it's expanding in a global sense now. Originally, the course was developed and worked in Europe alone. So what does the course consist of? Well, the course is a 5-day intensive course. It's 8 hours a day, although there is an hour for lunch. So it's quite intensive, and it's divided into afternoons and mornings, and that's the interesting part. The mornings are the part that we use to talk about the issues that we've just been speaking about here, and to try and get some consensus and to try and build some awareness among the lecturers of some of the issues that they're either facing, because some of the people who do the course are already teaching through English and having problems. Some of the people who do the course are going to face the problems. They haven't started yet, but they know they will. The afternoons mainly consist of what we call micro-teaching sessions. So there are 14 participants as a maximum on the course, and each participant has to deliver a 15-minute excerpt, if you like, of one of their classes. And they get feedback not just from the person who delivers the course, but also from all the other participants on the course, who play the role of students as the person is doing their 15-minute teaching session. One of the interesting things about this is we've discovered, as we've done more of these courses, and I found this fascinating because I come from an EFL background, that most of the lecturers had never been observed in their teaching before by anybody, and most of the lecturers also admitted that they'd never observed a colleague. So in all their years of teaching, they had never gone into somebody else's classroom to see how they did it, or they'd never had somebody in their classroom to see how they did it themselves, which I found fascinating, because in English language teaching, the presence of another teacher in your classroom becomes an incredibly commonplace thing. And in a very kind of we're all in this together sense, not judgmental. So come to my class, observe, we'll have a cup of coffee afterwards, you tell me your thoughts and I'll tell you my reasons, and we can both learn from the experience. It's kind of co-constructed learning. But this doesn't really seem to happen a lot, if at all, in many universities. So for most people, that was their first experience of that. And in fact, in feedback from the course, that's one of the things that people constantly mention as one of the aspects they like the most, and something that they say, and I don't know if this is true because we haven't followed up yet, is they say they will continue when they go back to their institutions. So, we also got some data from these courses. So the data is from 207 participants that were on these courses last year. Most of the participants had 10 to 14 years of teaching experience at university level. That doesn't mean that they'd been teaching through English, but just that they'd been teaching at university. 60% female and 40% male. I really don't know what that says, but it's interesting. And then the other figures here, 48%, interestingly, especially given the comment earlier, 48% were from the hard sciences. So most of the participants in this course were from the hard sciences, which is counterintuitive if you think that hard sciences are a place where language is less important. And that's another really interesting thing that's coming out of these courses. 32% were from social sciences and 20% were from arts and the humanities. And the second most interesting thing about these courses is that most of the courses, there's two models for the course. One model is the British Council goes to a single institution and delivers the course to the lecturers, the 14 lecturers chosen from that institution. Now, that will normally mean that we have different departments represented in that institution. The other model of the course is even more interesting. So the British Council offers the course in a city, and the lecturers from different universities in that country come to that city to do the course. So then you get not just a mix of disciplines, but you also get people from different universities often meeting each other for the first time and working closely together for the first time. So some of the feedback from these people. As I said, the thing that constantly gets the best feedback from the courses is the micro-teaching sessions. For the reasons I mentioned before, and people feel that it's the most, if you like, practical, useful part of the sessions. Because the idea of this course is to send people away with actual practical ideas that they can try out in their classes and hopefully make their teaching more effective. This is something that Ivan mentioned yesterday. He talked about discussion with teachers from other universities. So a lot of the teachers say, oh, this is amazing. This is the first time I, from the economics department, have met these people from the mathematics department. And I'm finding out really interesting information about how they teach their students, what they do in their classes, how the mathematics faculty works. And again, I find that quite amazing because I assumed that universities had communication between faculties. And in fact, I discovered that not only do they not have communication between faculties, but often not even between departments in faculties, or even between teachers in departments. And I think maybe there's a major issue with communication in universities. And in fact, one of the funniest anecdotes was a course I was running in Austria, and the IT and maths people were working with the people from social science, actually from social work. And it turned out that the social workers were using the university Moodle, which the IT and the maths guy had set up, in really innovative and creative ways that the maths teacher and the IT teacher had no knowledge of. And so the people that created the software were taking notes from the users about how the software could be used and saying, oh, this is great, we're learning so much. And that's one of the examples of the kinds of kind of cross-pollination or communication that can happen. And one of the nice things about the courses is that people normally say, oh, we're going to try and keep this going. We're going to try and have regular meetings between these people and keep this communication open. And of course, that also happens in the model where people are coming from different universities. So it creates contact between universities at teacher level, which I think, lecturer level, which I think is really interesting, not just at institutional level about more formal collaborations. And this is interesting because they say, we really like the way we interacted in the course. Diversity of subjects, styles of teaching hard subjects. So again, we come back to this hard subjects and this idea that they can be taught in different ways. And this is also something that has a strong connection to the students, because the first comment is, we sometimes point out, is in a way illogical if their teaching style then reverts back to the way I'm speaking to you now, where I speak, you listen, I have the knowledge, you receive the knowledge from me passively, and then possibly repeat it in an exam. Now, I'm not saying that that's totally prevalent in all universities, but there is still quite a lot of that around. But they actually enjoy the interaction and see the reason for it. And the other idea is that they actually do, from these micro-teachings, they get to experience what it's like for the student. And it's quite interesting because that gives them an idea of the comprehension difficulties that a student would have. If you can imagine students having to sit and listen to hour after hour, that's intensive listening comprehension and taking notes and listen to a speaker and look at slides at the same time. That's a huge comprehension overload. And really, it's going to transfer very little information, and possibly very little learning is going to take place there and then in the classroom. They get to experience this for themselves, and it changes people's minds a little. So as I say, EMI is not just interesting for people hopefully improving their language skills. It's also quite interesting because it seems to have an effect on the way teachers think about the way knowledge is transferred and learning takes place. And it seems to give them an insight into how that feels for the student and how it might work for the student, and basically to think about things in a more student-centered way, which I would argue can only be a good thing. I'll read this for the people at the back because it's low down. It says, very interesting course. It opened my mind about new things I could implement in teaching, and I feel more confident about giving my classes in English. So that's one person's comment, but I like to think that that's the, if you like, the objective of the course in general. Send people away with more tools and a little bit more confidence. One of the things that we spoke about in this conference yesterday is that in the hope that more international communication or transfer takes place, then, for example, if more Erasmus students are to come to Bosnia-Herzegovina, then it's probably likely that in order to attract some of those students, that courses will have to be delivered through the medium of English so that the students can actually understand and follow the courses. And for me, maybe that's one of the major reasons for introducing English as a medium of instruction, because it allows universities to internationalize where the language barrier in the past really didn't. When Erasmus worked at first, we used to get students, for example, coming to European universities having to receive their classes in their subject through a language that they didn't speak and didn't understand. And there was a kind of a tacit acceptance on everybody's part that we don't give them very much content. They enjoy themselves for 3 months and they pass and go home with you know, there was an element of that. But I think now it's a little bit more real. In the new Erasmus Plus programs and with the system of European credits, there's more harmonization taking place between content in degrees, and this kind of, the transfer, if you like, from one country to another becomes more seamless and more real. And I think that this country in particular has great advantages in terms of its location in Europe, in the centre, but also in terms of its multiculturality, where there's a skill set here that maybe other countries have to work harder to acquire. So I hope that was interesting and informative, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Želim da se zahvalim gospodinu Spainu na njegovoj prezentaciji. Ukoliko imate neka pitanja za gospodina Spaina, on će biti jedan od učesnika na našem okruglom stolu, tako da tu ćete imati priliku da postavite pitanje. Sada, ako mogu pozvati našu iduću predavačicu, gospođu Gwendydd Caudwell.
Hi, dobro utro, good morning. I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you a little bit about assessment and its role in higher education, specifically how it can help you in terms of mobility and supporting your students in higher education with their English language learning goals. So today, I'm going to start at the very beginning. When I was thinking about this presentation, I started to think about all the questions that I get from people around the world who are looking for new tests and testing in higher education. And they often perceive that they need a test of specifically academic English. And as we just mentioned, that is quite varied and quite different. So how would you pin that down? I'm not going to be giving you any concrete answers on that today. As you'll notice, it's quite a wide consideration. Then we'll be looking at what you should think about with assessment, how you can choose an assessment tool that will support you in your goals. And then finally, I'll just talk you through a couple of case studies where we've used Aptis in higher education and how that has met some of the things that I will be covering. I did plan to have a little section for Q&A at the end, but I think because we've got coffee coming up and we're sort of running a little short of time this morning, that it might be better if we do it over coffee. So please, I do tend to charge through my slides very fast, so write down your questions as we go through and grab me afterwards or at any time this morning. So, what is academic English? As I said, people often think that you need to test it to be able to study in higher education. And really, if you look at all the different levels, even within academia, when I think myself, I completed my master's, for example, 3 years ago. I'm doing my PhD as I'm a glutton for punishment, it would seem, right now. And if I look at my dissertation, I find some of it a little embarrassing because I write very differently right now. So even as you progress through higher education, your English changes, improves, hopefully. It might get a bit worse, who knows? So at each level, there are different requirements for your academic English. There are different requirements for your possible level of English, and even before you go in, which is a crucial time where we test people to be able to study abroad, 15 to 18, there are lots of other considerations there that we need to think about in terms of realistically what they can produce in English, which might not be academic. We often use the CFR to try and level some of these skills, both academic and general English. You will notice that my lines are a bit strange. If you've got OCD, this might bother you a little bit, but there is method to my madness here. You will notice that the steps at the beginning are quite short. And this is in terms of your English language development, can go a little bit faster at the beginning because you're learning quite quickly, it's quite fun and interesting, for example. And then you would hit B1 and B2, which take you a little bit longer to get through. These are also the better defined levels within the CFR as well, for that very reason. And you tend to plateau in your learning. Yeah. And then you might go up to C1, C2 once you've mastered B2. These are rather close together as they are still quite difficult to differentiate between the two. We assume that native speakers are C2. That is not always the case. I know plenty of native speakers who wouldn't necessarily come across as C2. And it also depends on the skill. And within that as well, I mentioned that we use it with both academic and general English. we don't really have a measure of academic English, we're still trying to answer what academic English is, but we do have the academic word list, which we use quite a lot to be able to define whether people are doing these things at certain levels. However, any of the words on the academic word list do not appear before B1. So if you're thinking about trying to use that to help you determine academic English, then it's not necessarily suitable for lower levels, and general English is more suitable. And in my thinking, really, with this, that if you can master general English and you can hit sort of B2, for example, you were asked earlier whether you need to be B1, B2 or C1 to study in English, then you'd be able to learn all of that academic style, perhaps, that you would need to be able to perform your chosen subject well at university. Another consideration, I mentioned the lower age group, 15 to 18, which you are more likely to assess pre-entry to university. And this is a framework that I've been working on recently with Angela Hasselgreen, looking at the development, both socially and cognitively, of children, all the way up to teenagers, and what realistically they can achieve in the CFR. And as you can see, if you're looking at those who are pre-uni, they might not even achieve C1 before they would go to university. So it's all about matching your expectations of where they would be or where they need to be, so that you can decide how best to support them to get them where you would like them to be. So looking a bit more closely with 15 to 18-year-olds, their social and cognitive development is still really important, and that affects the way that they can perform certain tasks, most definitely. They are still struggling to understand, even in their native language, so I'm talking about L1 as well as L2 here. So even in your native language, you'll struggle with some particular abstract concepts, some things that you haven't really come across or done in your life before, so you're not used to it. And then you go to university and you're expected to do some of these things, presentations, for example, that kind of thing, which is actually a skill that you need to learn whilst you're there. So you've got social and cognitive development. The schooling background obviously really affects what kind of language level realistically they are likely to have, and what is achievable, as I mentioned on the previous slide, of that age group. So that's the kind of thing you need to think about if you're looking at assessing sort of pre-hire, or what you might expect them to be able to do before they start the course. And I've lobbed all of higher education into one. This is not because I think it's less complicated. It's in fact possibly more complicated. As we mentioned earlier, you might need specific skills and specific language to do technical writing, or if you are studying fashion, for example, you might need to write a proof of concept, or if you're talking about niche, I should imagine that your level of English and the way and style of writing would be very different. So the type of academic language that you are looking for perhaps might not be met in a general academic test, and what you would need to do is consider the kind of tasks that you would have in your assessment which specifically reflect the kind of tasks that you would like your students to be doing. And something that really has struck me quite recently, which I think that we forget about quite a bit, is that language development does continue well into your 30s. I spoke about my own experience with my studies and how my language is changing. And it's very true. We have maybe a misconception that because you're 18 or 19, 20, that you are an adult, or you're almost an adult, so you can perform all assessment tasks or school tasks or whatever as somebody of 35, 40 years would. And that's not necessarily the case. So it's something worth remembering. I'm going to skip that one. Okay, so what does all of that mean? There's a lot to think about. So what skills they need, how they're going to get there, what language level they need to complete them, that kind of thing. So when you're choosing the right test, you need to really think about the age group and realistically what they can do, what you want to know about them. So is it purely language level? Is it overall language level? Is it specific skills? Do you think they need to be more proficient in speaking and listening, for example, to be able to study, and you're slightly less worried about their reading skills? So what levels, even across skills, would you expect them to have, and how you are going to support them to get there? And then what the outcome of the test will be, which I think sometimes people forget a little bit when you found a test, you're going to use it, and then you think, great, I've got the results. What am I going to do with that? Yeah, and that's a really important question. What are the results telling you, and what are you going to do with them? Is it just a gold star? Well done, you have achieved this level. Please proceed to the next one. Or is it, you might need a little bit of help here, and we are going to help you do that so that you can achieve the next thing. And we will test you again to find out if you have managed that. So even within this, there's a lot to think about, I think, with assessment. So on to some of our examples with Aptis. And Aptis, I should tell you, is a general English test, not an academic English test. And there was a scenario that we've had recently in Georgia where probably a familiar scenario in many countries that they passed a law requiring all university students to graduate with a certain level of English. So they came to us. What are we going to do? How are we going to find out what level they are, and how are we going to get them to that level? So we embedded Aptis in their English language program so that they could see where they were and then assess how to get them to where they were going. So there were almost 5,500 students, were tested. And this is over 2 years. So it shows that we test sort of more than once and progressively to start to sort of monitor things. And they took only reading. Remember I mentioned earlier that you can choose, or you should think about the skill which is important to you. So they felt that measuring their grammar and vocab and reading skills would give them a good idea of their level. And they chose to deliver it pen and paper. I was very happy to hear yesterday Carl saying that we needed to have computer-based assessment, and Aptis is also available computer-based. So you've got a pen and paper version, a computer version, and a tablet version. So you can use it in the way which most suits your context. Oh, my goodness, that went a bit fast. There we go. So what the client really liked about this is that they had it, their English development was paired with the exams. They get quick marking, our turnaround is rather fast. And because it's an external test, they then have that confidence that somebody is doing it for them. Their responsibility, perhaps with the security and reliability and validity of the test, is removed, and they can feel good that they are doing something that helps their students in that way. Okay, and of course it's mapped to the CFR, so that's another thing which is quite important in this region. My second example is Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan. This is an ongoing project where they use Aptis to assess recent high school graduates across the country. So this is pre-entry. Okay, and they use it to filter. So this is another sort of test use. They use it to filter who will get IELTS, and that's quite high stakes because those who obviously achieve a higher level in Aptis then get to take IELTS and might get a scholarship. Yeah. So this is higher stakes than the previous example. And here we've got, it's always in the 8,500 candidates taking this one. Yeah. Again, it's pen and paper. They started with pen and paper. So even though computer-based sounds quite funky. There are still a lot of people in the world who prefer to do it pen and paper. There's a perception that if you physically have the test in front of you, that it makes it a bit more real. There's quite a few people still who are a bit nervous about doing it on computer. But one of the advantages of doing it on computer is that it's obviously faster. Your results are delivered more quickly within 48 hours. And for a lot of the people of this age group who we're testing, they prefer to do it computer-based as they feel quite confident being able to use it. Yeah. So with Nazarbayev, they felt that using Aptis was actually a benefit in terms of cost. So it saved them money as they could focus on using Aptis to filter and then only spend the money for IELTS on those who they deemed were ready to take it. They could test only one skill. They didn't have to do all 4 of them if they didn't want to. And we were there to provide them with the British Council solution to that. Okay, so this example is actually from Bulgaria, and this is with teenagers. This is quite recent. We had a request from a private school in Sofia where they are taught through the medium of English, and they felt that a lot of their students go abroad to study. They feel that they are particularly high-level students who might go to Oxford or Princeton or Yale, and what they really wanted to do was see where they were the year before, so that they could help them in that final year, that final push to prepare them to go to university. And what we did here is we did a slightly customized version of the test for them to meet their specific requirements. Because they felt that their students were such high level, they wanted to have that discrimination between the C1 and the C2, so that they could really sort of pin down and sort the wheat from the chaff. And so we provided them with a special solution where we helped identify which students were at which level for them. And this one is computer-based. So it's teenagers, they administer it themselves, and this one is computer-based. The next one, I know I spent a bit of time at the beginning saying that academic English is very hard to define, but this is actually an example where we have customized one of the tasks to make it a bit more academic. And here what we've done is customized the writing, because the university in Canada felt that it was really important that they could assess the writing skills of the people in terms of a task that they would realistically do. So we've worked with them here, where they've provided me examples of all the kind of tasks that they do at university, so that we can develop something which will realistically get the kind of performance that they're looking for. And we are also doing it as part of benchmarking. A problem that they have with admissions at Kwantlen University is that they use IELTS, TOEIC, TOEFL, and their own placement test to decide which English language pre-sessional course the students will go on. And of course, they're kind of faced with an issue where they have maybe 3 different results, 3 different tests, people going into a class with lots of different levels, and they need to kind of standardize it. And so we are going to be doing an ongoing study with them where we're benchmarking Aptis scores to the scores of those who've come in previously, so that we can help them quite easily place their students. And this is the last one, all the way out there in Chile, in Universidad de Talca, where we're using Aptis as a diagnostic test to help them with their English language programs. Yeah. So again, the students are tested at an ongoing basis at times they deem are crucial stages to help them progress and support their students. Okay. The university themselves administers it, which is another plus with Aptis, is you take charge of the delivery. You don't have to always wait for us to do that. We do give support. We have given sort of 20 hours of support to the university so that they feel confident to administer it themselves. And they have all 4 skills, and they do it. They can schedule it themselves, and they do it at times and days and specific times in the program which they feel is the best time for them. So those are some of the examples. It's not all of them, there's quite a lot, but I just thought I'd show you a few different ones to give you an idea of lots of different ways that you can use assessment within the higher education sector to help you either with your benchmarking or placement decisions or support in English language skills or further study. So that's it from me. Do catch me afterwards. Thank you very much. Hvala.
Hvala gospođi Caudwell na njenoj prezentaciji. Sada ćemo nastaviti, prvo ćemo imati kratku kafe pauzu koja će biti poslužena u prostoriji do, a nakon toga nastavljamo sa okruglim stolom na kojem nadamo se da ćete se svi pridružiti. Hvala.
Test proba. SŠ. 1, 2, 3. S. S, 1, 2,